Let's go back to the situation in the eastern Congolese city of Goma, where this Thursday it is calm but tense. We're in the company of human rights attorney Daniel Levine-Spound. The connection there is back. We heard the UN Secretary General talking about respecting territorial integrity and talking up the need for a summit that's going to be taking place starting on Friday to yield results. What more can the UN do? What more can the international community do?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And just to say, I very much appreciate the Secretary General's emphasis on territorial integrity, because as I and many other lawyers have argued, we are in an aggression situation in which we have one country, Rwanda, which has invaded eastern DRC with no meaningful self-defense argument. We should be thinking about this along the lines of Russia and Ukraine rather than some sort of civil war. But as you pointed out, the real question is not what words will be said, but rather what actions will be taken. And for the past 4 years, we've seen very little appetite to hold Rwanda accountable for its actions in eastern Congo, whether Rwanda remains a major troop contributing and police contributing country to the United Nations. Rwanda recently received $20 million in funding from the European Union for a military mission in Mozambique. You mentioned earlier that 10 years ago, the occupation of Goma didn't last very long, and it's also important to note that 10 years ago, M23 ultimately collapsed. And a huge part of reason M23 collapsed was because of international pressure on Rwanda, right? We saw hundreds of millions of dollars in financial aid to Rwanda frozen. We saw the president of the United States at that point, President Obama, on the phone with Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. We saw massive mobilization regionally, right? We saw African states contributing troops to MONUSCO. So we saw this major international outcry and coordinated efforts to hold Rwanda accountable. And when those actions took place, Rwanda ceased supporting M23 and the group ultimately collapsed. It's precisely these sorts of accountability actions that we haven't seen 10 years later. So if you're an official sitting in Kigali and you're part of commanding these operations, I think the question for you is it politically worth it? And I can imagine that for many Rwandan officials, the calculus so far has been yes. Because we've seen a lot of words and a lot of statements, we haven't seen a lot of actions, nothing that I think could meaningfully push the Rwandan government to say, hey, this isn't worth it. We should no longer be deploying, recent numbers are pointing to over 7,000 troops into eastern DRC.
Daniel Levine-Spound, many thanks for speaking with us here on France 24.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.